Good afternoon, everyone. This is Shravani from WRI, your host for today. I welcome all of you and thank you for all your time. I see a lot of regular people, and it's great to see some of the new attendees as well. So we have people from all over the world attending, keen on this topic. So I thank you for your time and interest in this webinar. So quickly, the regular people already know about it, but then for the new people, I'm just reintroducing what is this webinar series all about. So this webinar series is a part of the project called the Electric Mobility Forum, which was launched by the Vice President of India on 20th of March 2019. So the whole idea of the Electric Mobility Forum was that people are, working in silos and fragments in their own respective areas. However, there is not a common platform where they could have an efficient way of exchanging knowledge and resources. So this whole idea came up, and then we came up with 3 techniques in which we could accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles in India. So these were mainly convenings. So that means that we do state and national level workshops on thematic areas revolving around electric mobility. Second is scaling, and webinar is a part of the scaling thing. So that means that people working in their respective areas come up to this common platform and share their knowledge, and we spread awareness and technical knowledge to the wide world. And it's for free, of course, that's the best part. The third one is about mentoring, which means that we do pilots and state entities who are keen and enthusiastic about adopting electric mobility in their respective cities. We help them via providing technical assistance and guidance to them. So we have successfully completed many such important topics for the webinars, such as retrofitting, testing and accreditation, battery technologies, charging, standardization for charging, etc., etc. And the last time we did it on financing, so corporate adoption of electric vehicles in India. And this time we have an even more interesting topic for electric vehicles. So this time is about sustainable financial mechanisms and innovative business models for electric vehicles in India. So, why are we having all these kind of topics specifically for India is because when you see that most of the successful countries, those have EVs, are basically, obviously adopting from Western countries is a great idea to learn from their challenges and their journey. However, in India, it's so diverse. Let it be the climatic conditions, topography, etc. So we need to have homemade solutions, custom made. So, and also one solution in one state wouldn't fit it in the other state in India. So one size does not fit all, right? So it is very India specific, and I hope people internationally can also learn from our challenges, struggles, and journey, and see how interesting and challenging it is. So today's topic is about this. So we all know that in our respective domains, we are fighting against a common goal, which is tackling the air pollution throughout the world. India as well has taken many promises and steps towards promoting this in terms of, say, policies, incentives, subsidies, etc. However, if you see the stats, it's only 0.1% of the total fleet size the EVs are in India at the moment, which is a pretty sad number despite of so many investments. So this happens mainly because of different kinds of anxieties, say it be range anxieties, or where do you find charging infrastructure, how to create demand, etc. But one of the other major factors is the cost of it, because in our heads we have oh my God, the capital cost is so much, so is it really worth it? And if I invest, then how do you get the profit back from it? So let me tell you that we have always been focusing on public transport, which is the most efficient way of transport. However, in this thing, we want to do a reality check. Tomorrow, if we give a notice that, okay, everybody needs to go up in a public transport, this won't happen overnight because it needs the service stability, reliability, door-to-door connectivity, which will take a wee while, right? So what happens to the existing cars, four-wheelers particularly? So we want to know that how do you make them efficient and effective currently? So we have the speaker for today, Mr. Vibhuj Pinani, who will throw us light on such interesting topics and curious questions. So let me give like a really brief introduction about himself, because I would like him to speak about himself, like about his domain and expertise. However, he's the managing director of the company called Accord, and he is basically an aerospace engineer by training, and currently he's working in this company, the Accord, and leads the sustainable development finance practice, and has created a financial instrument to electric mobility projects worth about, say, $250 million in India and North America. And he's also involved in various startups in terms of like green energy and electric mobility space. So yeah, we would be knowing different things from him in this presentation. So I know you guys are like really keen on this topic, and you have signed up for the key 4 questions, which we have mentioned in the website when you registered for it. For example, how should we look at transitioning from vehicle-centric finance to ecosystem finance, and the use of e-mobility in rapid urbanization, etc. So these are the 4 key points. But however, I would like to say the massive macro takeaways from this webinar today would be, number 1, how does electric mobility connect Indian market to the global capital liquidity? And how can electric mobility address the changing consumption pattern and needs of the Indian demographic? So, which we can see like it's really at the moment interesting, because a lot of people here are millennials, so they have different kind of consumption requirements. The ownership goes down or up, so we'll be demystifying all these kind of things via today's session. So the key things that Mr. Binani is going to explain us are about like macro aspects or approach of sustainable finance, concepts about liquidity sink, and there are different kinds of leases, what are they, and various kinds of business models. So one disclaimer that I would like to give to all of you is that I know that there are people from various startups and entrepreneurs and various backgrounds here, manufacturing, etc. This is only like a very generic overall utopian idea about like how it should or should not work. So mind you, one size does not fit all. That does not mean like what we're preaching over here could work for you. If it works, it's amazing. However, it's again like a hit and trial method. So yeah, I mean, the whole idea is to understand the overall macro perspective of the finance situation in electric mobility. So without taking much time, I would like to point out some logistical things here, which most of you already know, but still I'm repeating. So this is a 1-hour question, 1-hour session. So we'll be having the presentation right after this, followed by question and answers. So as you know, we might have time constraints. We apologize already that I would not be able to take all of your questions, but I would encourage you to send me all your questions in the questions box and not in the chat box, because when you do that, I would know your name, designation, and your question. So once the session is over, I would send it to the respective speaker. He would be sending his perspective on those questions, and we'll be uploading that material as public query in the same link that you have already registered for. The last thing is that even I do it. I know it's difficult, but then you need to stop doing it, because, like, for example, don't worry if you have missed out on any slide or you have missed out on hearing something, your network issue, don't worry about it, to be honest. Why? Because we'll be having the presentation uploaded on the same link that you have registered for, and the best part is we'll be having the whole video of it, so that even if you miss his speech, you can still figure out via the video that what were the things that you did miss out. So don't worry about taking pictures or notes or addition to that, but pay your full attention, and I hope this topic is as beneficial for you as it is for me. So look forward to hearing his story and his extensive work. So now I hand it over to Mr. Binani, and I would request him to start off the session by giving a brief introduction about himself and his organization, and like what kind of work is he doing, and then take us through the whole concept of it. Mind you, it could get like a little bit technical, but I really can vouch for it that it's going to be something new that you're going to learn today, and it's going to be interesting. So transferring it over to Mr. Binani now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Shravani, thank you for having me and for the very wonderful introduction about who I am. So, to start off with, let's introduce my company, Record. Record is an investment bank which we started in 1976 in the US. It's an American Indian bank with offices in San Francisco, Sun Valley, New York, and Bangalore. And we focus primarily on arranging financing for transportation assets, power and infrastructure projects all across the world. In this webinar, we will be speaking about our approach to promote e-mobility from a micro perspective as well as a macro approach. And all of the concepts described in this webinar are all intended to be driven by the private and not government supported. So without further ado, let's start the webinar. So the first idea that I want to convey to everyone is something called sustainable finance. And this is the macro approach towards promoting e-mobility. And what is sustainable finance? So sustainable finance is any model which is independent of governmental support such as tax benefits and even subsidies. So the key elements of sustainable finance is it must be profitable because it needs to be attractive for large scale investments. It needs to have enough of incentives for financial institutions to have an interest, and it needs to be market based. So it's supported by just your average free market economic concepts. Also, whatever the model that we choose for sustainable finance, it needs to be replicable and scalable with minimum marginal cost. By this, we mean that this particular model within a specific country, such as India, should be able to adapt from one state to another state and the changing demographics that comes with it, with a little bit of tweaking. And most importantly, it must provide a positive societal effect. It's not just return for the investors, but it needs to provide societal value because without those values, this project for sustainable finance cannot be a long-term base. So what is happening in India that we are coming up with this idea of sustainable finance and sustainable development? So in India, we're going through a phase called rapid urbanization. This is India's the only country where rapid urbanization is occurring naturally. The other country which had rapid urbanization was China, but that was government sponsored, and India it is people sponsored. So this is something which is very new, and we are going to have 600 million people living in urban areas or an urban population of 600 million by 2030. To give it a perspective, that's the population of Europe and twice the population of US in 1/8 the land mass. So you're talking about very large markets compressed into very small areas, which is very attractive. We're going to have 50 new cities with over 1 million residents. The demographic of this residents is going to be young, and therefore the consumption needs is going to just increase on a year-on-year basis. This creates a very attractive scenario for economic and financial investments. So what do you need to support urbanization, or basically what do you need to build a city? You need resources, you need physical infrastructure, social infrastructure, and financial infrastructure. These are the four pillars on which a city sustains itself, a society develops, and a country expands. So e-mobility actually contributes to all of these four pillars. And therefore, e-mobility is a very intricate part of urbanization, and it could be a great opportunity for India to rapidly urbanize itself at a very cost-effective manner. So what are the areas of influence that electric mobility has? It contributes in the energy, which is your resources, your physical, which is your mobility, your societal, which is on your health, and it contributes to build a credit market for your financial pillar. And The credit market is particularly of an importance to us, not just because we are an investment bank, but because in India, when we create a credit, we can actually build the other spheres, which is energy, mobility, and health. So, what are the factors of electric mobility which allow us to finance rapid urbanization and create a sustainable finance model and sustainable development? Uh, One of the main factors is the operating cost of an electric vehicle, whether it's a commercial vehicle or a personal vehicle, is fixed because you know how much of energy you're consuming. The cost of an energy, that is a kilowatt hour of electricity, can be fixed. The life of an electric asset is much longer than an ICE engine, and therefore we can have a stable level amortization of asset cost. Then we know the maintenance cost of an electric vehicle is much lesser than the maintenance cost of a internal combustion engine powered vehicle. And the maintenance cost as the total cost of the operation is a very low factor, which allows us to um, not have a lot of focus on it and yet keep it relatively stable. The other factor which electric mobility really helps in urbanization is the fixed and the certain demand for energy. This is very important because if we have to develop new grids, new power plants to feed a young demographic whose needs are only increasing, 600 million people in the urban areas, we need to have a stable demand. Uh, Retail power is not stable. We're used to just plugging in something in a socket and switching it on and expect power to flow. That's not how power is produced, though. In order to have that on-demand power, you have to continuously produce power which is not used. Electric mobility provides a base demand which allows us to have a stable grid and finance that stable grid based on the base demand. Then we already know the known positive carbon effects of electric mobility. We know per kilometer how much an electric mobility saves in carbon dioxide vis-a-vis a similar petrol or diesel vehicle. And the last factor of electric mobility is, unlike a diesel or a petrol vehicle, electric mobility can be used in a sister sector. The same vehicle can be dismantled into various components. The electric motor could be used for agricultural pumps. The electric batteries could be used for behind the meter storage, and the power electronics could be used for telecom. So this asset, which is in its first life, providing the service of mobility, is providing service of energy, communication, and agriculture and nourishment in a second life. So therefore, the real life of an asset is extremely long and it produces a massive societal effect. Having this benefit of electric mobility is a big plus for rapid urbanization. So how do we, fund all of this? Where's the money? So let's just get a little bit of perspective of what's happening around the world for the past decade. So since 2008, we've gone through a great recession, as we call it. So we've had 12 years of low and negative in certain areas of global interest rates, coupled with quantitative easing, which is basically central banks of different countries just increasing the liquidity at a massive pace. And this has resulted in trillions of dollars of liquidity looking for a place to park itself. And most of this liquidity has a bit of a green investment commitment, which they were initially funding for solar and wind, and which is why we've seen the cost of them coming down. And now that solar and wind have become market based, they no longer satisfy the investment return requirements for green investment, and therefore electric mobility could become a big avenue for that. So how do we attract it? We offer them a concept of liquidity sink. This is a thermodynamic concept of a heat sink. Decord has used pure engineering to model something which can attract money. And we soak up this excess liquidity through a mechanism which is fueled by rapid urbanization. We'll discuss that in the later slides. Electric mobility plays an important factor because the biggest risk to investment is not the risk of the money not coming back. That is something which we can price in. That is a cost scenario, not a risk scenario. The biggest risk is the uncertainty, something that I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. That is what prevents money from flowing in. And electric mobility addresses this problem head on, and it provides a platform for transport, mobility investment, energy investment, and social investments. So this is a new paradigm. This is getting more into the technical parts of how do you build up this liquidity sink. We call something called the rapid urbanization e-credit, which has two main spheres, which is the low uncertainty, which is an attractive uh, character for attracting foreign investments, and high yield. The high yield is a factor of various elements, which we'll describe later on. Let's first tackle the low uncertainty. We have the fixed and certain operational cost of electric mobility, and then we have a large demand pool of users. This is where the rapid urbanization of India comes to play. A large demand pool of 600 million urban population is where you can offset your revenue risk. You can say, I can have a certain number of a load factor and utility of the asset, irrespective of clubbing it into a certain area, where if you would have, because you have such a high population density, you would definitely have your asset utilized. So let's get into the idea of low uncertainty factors. We've already spoken about the operational cost. Let's talk about the complementary uses of the infrastructure required to promote electric mobility. Now, let's define this infrastructure. This is charging networks, which is one part, but the associated infrastructure to support the charging networks, which are transformers, switch gears, and microgrids. These have use of supporting the existing energy demand of 600 million people, the rapid urbanization, in the afterlife of the asset, and of course, the large pool of users with dependable credit revenue. This is very important for the low uncertainty. A large, urban, young demographic whose consumption needs are only going to increase, and therefore I can depend on them to consume what I'm investing in. Now let's go to the yield mechanics. So this is where the sustainable development concept begins to show itself. It's cycle, it's independent of any government infusion, as you can see over here, and it's sustaining provided the profits are present and can account for itself. So we start with the liquidity sink, which has attracted all of this money. This liquidity sink transfers this money into a capital investment cost of the assets and a certain amount of money for the operational cost of the asset. This cost is then, this investment is then returned to the investors through a value addition. The value addition occurs from two aspects, which is user revenue from a large urban population. And there are different forms of revenues. You know, you could have someone going for shared mobility, or as public transport, basically people using electric mobility. And then the other revenue stream comes from independent power producers. IPP is a short form here for independent power producers. Because electric mobility offers a stable and level demand and supplementary benefit of developing a microgrid, that revenue can also come in to the liquidity sink and attract more liquidity for the power sector. This value addition, which is added onto the investment, then creates a series of cash flows which go into an account to service this value addition cycle once again. And anything remaining from the service is what we call profit, which is the yield, which then gets returned back to the liquidity sink, which can either be withdrawn or reinvested. 90% of the time it is reinvested. So this structure is what we call the e-credit structure, the yield mechanics. Now let's look at a different approach. This is we need to define between credit and debt and lease finance and debt. So first, let me define what credit and debt is. Credit is where you go to people with money who want to lend directly to you. This is peer-to-peer lending, but on a bond market finance. So India needs to develop a bond market where you're not borrowing from the banks, but you're borrowing from individuals who want a steady source of return and not a bullet payment. A bullet payment is a one-time source where you, for example, you invest in stock markets, you sell your stock, whatever appreciation you get, that's your return, but you just get a one-time payment. A debt is an averaged out payment, and a debt to a private holder is called credit. A debt to a banking institution is called banking debt. So when we create a credit market, we free up the banking system to lend to other people. And so the really easy borrowers, like large corporates with good standing, can borrow from the credit market and not crowd out the public from the bank. So the bank's capital is not used to lend to them, but average Joes, as we call them. Now, what is lease finance? Lease finance and debt finance are very different. in debt finance, let's just take an example of financing a vehicle. You want to buy a new car. You go to a bank and you say, I want to get a car loan, and that's called a vehicle finance or a debt finance. In that, you own the car, you claim the depreciation for the car, and you can get a loan based upon the term of the loan, based upon you and your ability to pay. Lease finance has its own set of rules. The asset ownership is lies with the lessor. Now you get a third party in who is actually the lender. Your lender is not the bank, but this third party. He may borrow from the bank or he may put his own money in. That's his side. We'll come to that in the next few slides on what are different uh, options for that particular lessor. But the borrower, which is in this case known as the lessee, is function is just to utilize the asset, not to own the asset. And therefore, the borrower never gets any appreciation from anything from the asset. Neither does he get any tax ownership. Now, the last point is very important here is the term. In a lease finance, for it to be a true lease finance, you cannot have a life of the lease more than 85% of the economic life of the asset. And if you have to refurbish the asset to extend its economic life, you cannot change the asset more than 30% of the asset cost at that particular time. If you invest more than 30% into it, it then comes back into lease finance. For refurbishment, it goes into debt finance. So now let's look at the different forms of lease finance for the lessor and the lessee. So this is a simple lease finance. This is a direct lease, which is no longer used, but this is how it all started. This is where a lessee just pays rent to a lessor directly. This is the old adage. This is what you have when you rent a house or a flat. This is what you would form. Now we call it leverage lease. This is where we bring in various benefits of tax, monetization, depreciations, and various other factors to lower your average borrowing cost, which is your lease rates, to the lessee. And this is where the lessee pays all his rents to a lender. The lender services the debt and then reimburses the lessor who brings in the equity for the asset. So if there is nothing, if the rent is not enough to service the debt, the lessor does not get any return on his investment. So the lessor takes a risk. The credit that the lender lends upon is based on the lessor. So therefore, in this kind of a leverage lease, the lessee, which would, or a borrower who would typically not be able to get finance from a bank, can now get finance for his asset and generate income. Now, what are the components of a lease structure? And this is very important. This is a pricing mechanics, which I would like to explain. And many times we price an asset more than what market is willing to price an asset. So if you have an electric car, which costs 3 million rupees or 30 lakhs, it cannot be sustainable based upon the lease payments. So whenever an OEM is thinking about how do I enter the market, they must pay attention to financial engineering, not just building up the cost. So you have the first part, which is cost of asset, then the cost of infrastructure, which is what is required to keep the asset running and have a utility in order for it to generate cash flows. And then the last part many people miss, and it is very important. This is called transactional cost. This is anything which is your overheads. So when you go to a bank to close on a loan, they also charge you a closing fee. That's your transactional cost. All of that cost has to be added because it's all paid on day zero or on time zero. Then you have the second part, which is your rent payments. These could be level or these could be variable depending upon the market, the asset, and the term. This is what you're going to be paying every month. This is what you call your lease payments or your rent payments. Then the third part is the cost of energy and maintenance. So what is going to cost you to run the asset in order for you to make money so that you can actually pay the rent payments. And then the last part is after the term of the lease, when the asset is refunded back to the lessor, if he sells the asset on that particular day, what can he get from it? And that is what we call the residual value. And then I'm going to explain part 5 in the next slide. So this is how the price needs to be fixed from a financial perspective, where we have a present value of the asset based upon part 2, 3, and 4. These factors are discounted to create a present value of the asset, and this present value of the asset must match part 1, which is the net cost of the asset. This is how you call a balanced economics. So let's just go a bit over this formula. Your CF here stands for cash flows. Your cash flows are your rent payments. Your K is the term of the frequency of the payments. So if it's a 10-year lease and you pay monthly payments, so then K goes from 0 to 120. Your I is your interest rate that the lessor would charge you. Again, this is not a bank is charging you. This is what a lessor is charging you. So this I is a blended interest rate. To know more about the blended interest rates, you can please send a query and I'll go in detail on that. It's a bit too much to go on to this slide. So once we match the price of an asset, a financial price of an asset, with the physical price of an asset, through this, we're able to create an asset which can plug into the liquidity sink economics and then have a profitable, sustainable finance. So what do we get once we do this exercise? What are the benefits to rapid urbanization? We get a new power grid because you need to have a lot of good transformers, microgrids, and various associated lines to charge your electric mobility. You get a much robust and better power sector because of a base demand. Once you know you have at a certain period of time, the profitability of independent power producers or any power producer increases, and they can. The assumption is they can pass on this profitability as lower industrial power rates to manufacturers who can then have more competitive products and increase more jobs. So here we see how an electric car or an electric commercial vehicle has affected the textile industry, for example, with no direct correlations, just through an indirect mechanism. It reduces your mobility pressures. This is very important in an urban, a young demographic of a country whose major asset is intellectual asset. And therefore, if we reduce mobility pressures, we reduce the time spent on the roads, reduce man-hour losses, we can increase the competitiveness of utilizing intellectual power of India. And the last point here is it will the market, which the MSMEs, or as we call them, the medium and small, micro, small, and medium enterprises, who can attract a good understanding, can borrow from this liquidity thing rather than borrowing from the bank, and the bank will then have more capital to lend to individuals or people who cannot borrow from the liquidity thing. So you're increasing a greater borrowing capacity and increasing greater capital investment due to that. So electric mobility can cause these four effects, which can lead to rapid urbanization, finance it, and massive GDP growth. Now we go to the micro methodology. The micro methodology here is from the business model perspective, where we take whatever we've spoken of sustainable mobility and shrink it down to how startups and companies can adopt it. So the business models that we see are going to be spearheaded by startups with incumbents adopting the startup success story. So the startups are going to have a proof of concept. They're going to have a very small scale up stage, and the incumbents will then adopt it. A clear indication of this is what Bajaj has done with its Chetak electric scooters and investment in used. So let's see how EVs are able to plug into what's happening in the market. So today, markets and consumption behavior is completely changing. Consumers focus on convenience, experience, and are not motivated to invest in capital assets. So it's a clear indication of what's happening in the auto sector. And this is actually a good format for electric mobility. It may be bad for the auto sector in general, but for electric mobility, what's happening as shared mobility could not have come at a better time. And that is a positive action. We'll talk about it in a bit later. The other part is e-commerce. Again, the convenience factor. Consumption, people buying a lot of the groceries or the consumption needs, like your clothes, your shoes, your electronics online. That is driving a commercial mobility market, which is a very urban drive cycle, which can be serviced by electric mobility at a very cost-effective rate. Also, the on-demand nature of personal mobility is going to be aggravated by the lack of parking spaces, increased traffic congestions, and therefore you're going to have a greater demand for shared mobility, which is another form of just a high asset utilization. And when you have a high asset electric mobility, low operating cost, and fixed operating operating cost, and we all know the TCO dynamic. EVs are a natural fit. So the shifting market dynamics can easily be serviced by EVs. Let's talk about the commercial electric mobility before we go into the PVs. So the immediate low-hanging fruit here is going to be the first and last mile deliveries, where you would have the small commercial vehicles or the light commercial vehicles with charging capabilities at the warehouses. Then we see a different change in logistical transit, where you have a hub and spoke model coming into India. So you're going to have multimodal transit also coming in. And when I say logistics, is not just of people, but also of the goods. So even in commercial mobility, we can talk about shared mobility for PVs coming into play over here, where you could have various types of electric mobility options for just providing a shuttle services from metros or suburban rails. And the last point is something which electric mobility has brought into the market is migration of the mass transit to mobility as a service nature. And you're going to get private players come into this transit market because of rapid urbanization and fixed cost of electric mobility. So you always had a demand for mass transit or what we would call public transit, but it was always serviced as a societal benefit from state transport entities. But electric mobilities can make that a profitable enterprise, and therefore you will get private players coming to it. So an example is Shuttle, which is operating in a lot of cities in India, and they are in this position. So an electric bus can become a private enterprise servicing a mass transit. So factors which drive the adoption of electric mobility is by the fleets and is the lease financing, which can replace traditional vehicle finance, which can allow higher leverages and much more larger degree of finance and a rapid scale up, higher utility and uptime of the asset because of shared mobility and mobility on demand. The traffic congestion is something where e-mobility's technical criteria begin to come into play because of rapid urbanization, hundreds of millions of people coming in. Your traffic congestion is going to get worse, and therefore your fuel efficiency of a diesel and a petrol vehicle is going to be even worse. And with deregulation of fuel prices, you're going to have much higher operational expenditure on your ICE vehicle than what you have today, and it's only going to increase because of the double whammy that India pays. Dollar rise in a barrel of crude is double taxed here because you also have to pay for the depreciation of the currency, and that's where EV is a start and stop operations. So during congestions or idling period, EVs are not using any power other than for your auxiliary loads. So you have a much heavier vehicle in an ICE, but you have a much efficient and leaner vehicle in an EV. And obviously the lower TCOs, this has been discussed many times, so people know that. Now let's go to personal mobility. So what's happening over here? So millennials are investing in experiences and not in asset ownership. That's why millennials are not buying cars, and they are an important factor because you're going to have your average age of your population by 29. So 40% of the 600 million people are going to be a millennial segment. Your entire consumption pattern is going to be driven by them. So any market solution, any OEM or any service provider or any even a state transport organization, any government agency has to create its own solutions to cater to the millennium problem. So millennium centric is required. Otherwise, you will not succeed in India. Experience and not ownership will reduce the traditional secondary market. This is very important because today the way vehicles are financed is based on a secondary market, and then it reverse engineers to how you get your vehicle financed. So over here, you're going to have is the vehicle that I'm selling, we spoke about the lessor after term is going to sell the vehicle. Is that vehicle, can it bring about a positive experience to the rider or to the driver? That positive experience during a heavy traffic congestion, stressful driving, increased pollution, air pollution, and noise pollution. Can that come in? And if that experience, if the answer to those questions, then the value of that asset is going to be higher. So valuation of an asset, or which is assets such as a car or an electric vehicle, is going to be determined rather than an experience, rather than its age or depreciation method. And then the most important part is millennials are commitment forward. They're not, willing to be tied down to having an asset like their parents would for 10 years or 15 years. And at the same time, it's important to note they are less cost conscious and more value conscious. So we need to cater to that. A millennial is willing to pay a higher price if he can extract an experience which is worth that. So this is an important slide. So let's go to why electric mobility can come in for the millennial sector. Because of the experience nature, they do not have a range anxiety during the urban drive cycles because they focus on their daily trips. They focus on the experience from they going from the home to the work and back, and if that can be a relaxing and stress-free experience, they're willing to pay for air conditioning, leather seats, connected mobility, entertainment inside, a luxurious expense. They're willing to do that. They would prefer a low commitment subscription model for self-drive vehicles rather than a high commitment long-term investment into the asset. But again, because the millennials are convenience oriented, hassle-free, no frills lifestyle, they would like to have a complete turnkey solution. Millennials do not want, and as a market, millennials, the mass market would not want to spend time over the weekends fixing the car or sending it to a workshop. They just want a car for the experience for that particular day that can provide them, and that's why any market solution has to provide a turnkey product for the millennials. So let's talk about the next 10 million cars. That's the target. So how do you sell 10 million cars? The first part is design matters. Please have this embedded into your DNA as an OEM, because today, if you don't produce a car which appeals on a design way, it's not going to sell. The days of a red box on wheels are gone. Because a market, a demographic which is young, educated, exposed to the world, globalized, integrated, and has 3 degrees of separation. Then the other thing is a short term. So your asset must be so recyclable that it can go from owner to owner every 2 to 3 years. The recyclability of the cars need to be there. You're going to have a lot of first time experiences that you're going to be generating. And this is where electric mobility's technical abilities come in, because you can refurbish an electric powertrain with minimum investment, changing out the battery packs, having a second life for the battery packs, paying for the next battery packs with the depreciating costs and all of those factors, and refurbish it and make it as good as it is new at the same level of experience. Again, since they are not asset concentric rather than experience concentric, millennials, as long as even if on an old car you're able to provide them the right experience, they're still willing to pay the same amount for that particular experience that they would for a brand new car. It's all experience oriented. And this has to be an ecosystem play. It cannot just be a vehicle and an energy provider. Today, the energy providers and the vehicle providers both have to be integrated to each other. So, and I would even go on to extend, it's not just the vehicle OEMs. It's a lot of the shared mobility companies, smart mobility companies, which all come together to form one single ecosystem. This is very important to understand. Let's look at the energy index and energy which runs the world, which is the oil companies. The market capitalization of them, the largest of them, is 1.4 trillion. Even if you take on the Saudi Aramco 2 trillion valuation, you're still at 2.5, probably 3 trillion. The market capitalization of the 4 technology companies is $4 trillion or above $4 trillion. So technology is much higher in demand, and people are willing to pay for that technology aspect rather than for the energy aspect. Again, keep this in mind and combine that with the value conscious vis-a-vis cost conscious. So let's look at the old adage of chicken versus egg, chargers versus EV demand, and how we can supplement all of creating an EV demand without investing in chargers. So first, let's understand charging an EV and filling up your petrol in your petrol engine or diesel in a diesel car is very different. You can fill up your gas tank in a gas station within 10 minutes. You cannot charge an EV in 10 minutes. So we need to understand that charging an EV is not going to be the similar way of putting up gas stations. then the Indian market is an urban cycle market, which is why you have EVs, which can really get promoted in India. We drive in kilometers, and our speeds are also in kilometers per hour, not in miles per hour. And therefore, our energy requirements of our electric powertrains are much lower compared to the same powertrain on the same vehicle if you had to implement it in the US, in Canada, in Europe. Um, these markets would tax your EV very much compared to an Indian market. Urban cycle, coupled with a large urban demand, allows you to cater an EV for overnight charging, where you could provide that as a service. Again, the whole ecosystem and the coordination, hassle-free. All I want as a user, again, I'm a user of your vehicle. I'm not an owner of your vehicle. So once you get that concept into the marketplace, as long as you're fulfilling my experience, you can charge me for it. I'm okay, but at least I get my experience out of it. And that's why we say EVs can come in even without chargers being put up on the roads, because your charger on the roads cannot service the requirement that an EV charger would need anyways, because you don't have enough of real estate parking space for an EV to sit for 4 hours to charge. It's not there. Many apartments in cities do not have parking associated with them. They park on the roads, and therefore you cannot have. So charging has to be a system where it is integrated following after the EV demand, and EV demand is brought about by experience and catering to the millennial market. So here we can actually say the chicken came first. So what are the future? EVs are going to change the way mobility and energy markets, both of them. It's going to change the nature of these markets. There's a lot of opportunity for EVs, not just directly on an electric mobility as an OEM, but as connected infrastructure, as energy infrastructure, as experience infrastructure. Will the incumbents transform from your typical vehicle finance dealership model to a methodology? Will they be able to cater to the millennials? All of the incumbents who are able to do that will ride out the auto slowdown, which is happening globally. And you could see General Motors, BMW, Daimler, Volkswagen, Ford have all started a shared mobility company to cater to this whole experience phenomena, because it's millennial driven, and whoever does that will lead the market. Time will tell. The most important part is, here's, like I said, startups are going to be the drivers. So legacy players will have to become nimble to stay relevant, primarily because the product life has reduced from an 8-year life average, like Mahindra Scorpio design could last for 8 to 10 years. Now that same car that you design from the drawing board has to be redesigned every 2 to 3 years. And so that cycle, as soon as you finish one design cycle, you're getting into another one. So that constant investment, that constant development, which is going to come in from an legacy player, is very anti their DNA today. So they will have to change and become nimble, a lot of partnerships with startups, and behave like startups in order to stay relevant. So guys, thank you for your time. I just want to make a small disclaimer. Everything that's presented over here is an opinion of the court and also mine. We make no representation of these ideas or guarantee that this would get you a profit in the marketplace. If you have any issues with our presentation or need more information on disclaimer, please contact us. If you have any more questions also, you can just send an email at emobility@thecordusa.com, and my team would be more than happy to answer. Thank you, Shravani. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. A wonderful presentation, and I hope it catered to all the sections of the participants today, and hope we were able to, answer some of your key doubts. So we see that we're already 3:53 and running out of time, and we see like a lot of questions popping out. So let's see how many questions can we take. So let's do like a quick round of say about a couple of questions. So one of the participants is asking, how can electric mobility help in expanding company distributions to tier 2 and tier 3 cities? This is specifically for Indian context. So what are your views on that?
That's a very good question. And in fact, it is something that is related to what the FMCG companies face. People were not buying parleys. So the demand of consumption has shifted from your traditional metros and tier ones to the new cities that we're talking about, which is coming about in rapid urbanization. And these cities are not as sophisticatedly developed as infrastructure. I'm not talking about the people. I'm not talking about the demographic. I'm talking about the physical infrastructure of the cities. And here is where electric mobility uh, can come in and help increase the distribution, because electric mobility has a fixed cost of OPEX. So in investment in distribution, which can increase the demand. So if you have a product which is more available, a product which you can understand feedback from that city, and you're catering to that as your primary market, um, will help you increase your demand. And therefore, electric mobility can help even consumption products or consumption industries come in over there, just because this fixed cost, large amortization, long life, those factors.
Brilliant. So, as we've already focused on like a particular mode of topic, but here is someone from the bus sector, and I don't want you guys to feel left out. So I will pop in a question from their perspective. So, what are your views on probably financing of electric buses procurement by, say, STUs and also the private operators? So, how should one go about it?
All right. So this is where I talk about credit versus banking. Financing of electric buses for STUs needs to happen from the credit market and the liquidity sink, and not from the banking market. If you're going to go from a typical, commercial bank debt perspective, you're going to have very high rates of interest, high cost of operation because of debt burden, because they penalize the high upfront cost. Whereas if you take the credit markets, which has this trillions of dollars of liquidity, right? And if you can create a liquidity sink, they're looking for 25, 30-year terms, which your bank will not be able to give you. And therefore, you're able to lower the cost of electric mobility on a per kilometer basis, and really take advantage of its TCO OPEX benefits. If you do a bank finance, you lose those benefits immediately. For private operators, it's going to be the lease finance mechanism which comes into play over here, where you'd have different forms of leverage leases, and you'll have a hybrid version of the credit markets and the lease finance coming in together, with a little bit of participation of the typical debt banking finance through the lease finance and not directly. Again, you see how we're avoiding the direct bank finance, because banking is primarily meant for retail borrowers, and retail always pays more than a B2B.
Cool. So, one of the questions, that's my favorite one, which I have also been like putting it all over my personal LinkedIn and social media, is I think everybody wants to know this. How do you create a demand for electric vehicles without making massive investments on infrastructure?
All right, that's very good, and it's very important to debunk this myth of put the chargers and then you'll get e-mobility. That's not going to work, primarily because it takes a long time to charge an electric car. You can have a really powerful charger, but your battery charge rate is limited by your cell, not by your power demand or your power supply. So you need to have the electric mobility demand come up and service it through a different form of refueling your energy. The paradigm of using gas stations will no longer apply to electric mobility. So the first pathway is going to be commercial vehicles, which would be a set of charging. The second pathway is going to be PV vehicles for shared mobility and experience-based mobility. Again, shared could either be through ride-sharing apps or through self-driven subscription apps, which I think is going to dominate the auto consumption. And the most important part of it is development, where I can buy an electric mobility. I can invest in it. I can buy an electric car today. I don't need to invest in a charger. Someone can come and pick up my car at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the night, drop it back at 5 o'clock in the morning, and it's all charged. That is how you're going to have the charging. I'm going to outsource my charging needs with third party, and it's going to create another set of jobs and another industry. And I pay on a per kilowatt on how much I charge, or I pay a subscription. There are different models, but you're not going to have chargers just because you have a charger. That's not going to inspire me to buy a car, because I need to have a dedicated charger to myself. Again, you're going to have this on-demand conflict coming in versus the availability. Just imagine, can you find a parking space in a popular mall or popular city? In India, it's very difficult. So think about that with charges. So with these three ideas of commercial, shared PV subscription, and also outsourcing the charging, you can actually create a demand without having this massive governmental.
Interesting. So there is not. So is there at all a solution? And if yes, then how do you solve the credit issues of India, specifically to electric mobility? Like, what kind of ways like we can tackle the
Yeah,
issues of.
that is a very interesting question. So there are two aspects to it. First, let's understand what is the credit hindrance in the world today. And this is the right time, right place. This is why we say sustainable development, sustainable finance, especially through electric mobility. Your time has come today. We have $3.7 trillion in barely investment rated capital market debt. And that has been come out because of the 12 years of low interest rates, negative interest rate, and quantitative easing, which has, by the way, started all over again. So you're going to have another 5 years of it. So there is a relaxation on how credit worthy you really need to be, where today you can have your earnings or your debt that you're borrowing about 5 times more than what you're earning, and you would still get funded. That's what major corporations today have, part of that $3.7 trillion piece. Now, what does electric mobility do to get you some sort of a credit standing? This is again independent of whatever collateral that you have. This is just purely the nature of electric mobility, which creates an additional credit standing. That's the advantage. Electric mobility provides you fixed OPEX, so you have a threshold minimum requirement of revenues for you to generate in order to service your investors, and investors could be. So therefore, with the fixed OPEX and the large urbanization pool, I just need to get the revenue X, my operating cost is Y, my operation cost of Y is fixed for a long time. My revenue X can go up, and therefore, as an investor, as a debt holder, I know that this particular project will not have an issue servicing my debt as long as it is executed properly. So now I've gone from a credit perspective or default rating perspective to an execution confidence. It's a very different paradigm at that point. And when I change that paradigm, I reduce the collateralization requirement, where the project itself and the cash flows generated by the project become the primary collateral of the project. And that's how if we increase electric mobility, the nature of it to develop cash flows, mobilize a rapid urbanization, population density, and demographic dividend, and plug that into the global liquidity market through liquidity sink, you will create an alternative form of collateralization.
Brilliant. So I'm afraid this is the last question that I have to take, and like I encourage, keep sending me messages and questions. We'll answer them shortly and uploading in the same link. So the last question is something from the startup's perspective. All right. So what is the difference between credit finance and debt finance, specifically from their point of view, like startup's perspective? So what's your say on that?
Okay, that's a good question. So this is where the lease finance section of my webinar comes into place. So let's take an example of a startup which is making commercial vehicles, and it could be your two-wheelers, it could be your three-wheelers, and it could be your four-wheelers, your small commercial vehicles. So if a startup needs to sell this to an operator, today an operator buys a Tata Ace or a bike or whatever, they go and buy it, and they go to traditional bank and get a vehicle finance. Now, a traditional bank financing in electric mobility is going to be very, conservative, because banking finances it through the secondary market. So credit finances it through your primary sources of income. So if an operator who wants to buy an electric product, I'm an operator, I'm a logistical operator, I have the sources of income, this is where the electric product is going to be deployed, this is what it's going to earn. That's where the credit market, which is the lease finance or the lessor, would come in and finance on the basis of that. He's not financing the market, he's not financing the product based on the fact that I can sell it somewhere else in the event of a default. I'm taking the assumption that you are going to be able to perform your services, and that the revenue that you generate from these services will be completely hypothecated to me. You're hypothecating the revenue as well as the asset, but not any other collateral. And therefore, I'll be able to control the cash flows and service my debt. anything left, I will pay it back to you. That's the leverage lease structure. That's where you get away from the bank, which is going to say you want 100 rupees, post 120 rupees worth of collateral. That's typically the bank finance way, because they finance on the secondary market rather than on the primary market. That's the difference.
Brilliant. So that brings us to the end of the webinar for today. I would like to thank you, our speaker, Mr. Vibhuj Binani, for sparing so much time for us and making an effort to make a brilliant presentation and give out such informative topics, which we all are keen on, like in segment wise. So I'm sure like one slide must have been a topic for like, say about like 5-7 classes, because the topic is so massive, right? But then we tried to make it compact and deliver as much as we could in 1 hour's time constraint. Lastly, I would like to also thank our kind supporters, the Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, who has been always supporting us in our work. Without them, obviously, it wouldn't have been successful. And my dear audience, who has always been like keen and excited about like new topics, and have been showing tremendous participation, not only from India, from all over the world, and from various segments of the EV domain. Lastly, I would like to say that this link in which you have registered will be uploading the presentation and the video of the same within a week. You'll be getting a notification, obviously, regarding the same. And in the meanwhile, in case you are doing some amazing work in your domain and you are interested to showcase your work via this platform, I encourage you to write to me. That is Shravani, SHRAVANI .sharma.org, and we'll get back to you depending on the excitement of the topic and how interesting it is. So yeah, we would love to hear from you. In case you have any suggestions about like what do you want to hear from us in the next month's webinars, please put in your suggestions and also like come up with new ideas. Yeah, it's really exciting. So here we are. That's all for now. Keep sending me your questions. We'll be trying to answering them, like all of them, and uploading in the same link. And signing off for today, this is Shravani, and thank you, Mr. Binani. Any last words?
Thank you for having me. And if anyone has any questions, please send them to Shravani, and my team and I will get back to you as soon as possible. We will answer all questions, so remember that. So please do send your questions.
Brilliant. Signing off for today. I'll see you next month, and we'll be shortly uploading the link for registration for the new exciting topic next month with the date and the time for the same. Bye-bye, guys.